Today, in this explainer, we're unpacking a deeply personal, incredibly staggering survival story. I'm going to take you through this exactly as I experienced it, chronological step by chronological step. This is the journey of a 12-year hostage situation. But the twist? This wasn't a physical prison. I was locked within the terrifying battlefield of my very own mind.
For 12 years, I've been held captive, unable to escape. I really want you to feel the heavy weight of those words. Imagine being a prisoner of war, inside your own body, constantly battling unseen hands, suffering horrific verbal abuse, and facing absolute terror where a malevolent entity is just taking turns inflicting emotional trauma on you. Here's the exact map of my decade-long struggle. As you can see, it traces an agonizing progression. It starts from a naive childhood mistake at age 13, moves through a slow 2-year gestation period, and plunges right down into a 5-year spiral of absolute torture. From there, we hit 3 final years of total despair, before finally reaching a dramatic, life-altering turning point in 2016.
So, let's start at the beginning, opening the forbidden door.
My descent didn't just happen in a vacuum. I grew up surrounded by this stark, constant contrast. On one side, I had the extreme chaos of my mother's severe bipolar disorder and addiction. It was an environment that violently oscillated between massive highs and devastating lows. But on the other side was my anchor, my grandmother. She was my comforting presence. So when I tragically lost her at age 16, my primary anchor was just ripped away, leaving me completely adrift in all that chaos.
But even before that devastating loss, a critical trigger happened when I was 13. In this really misguided quest to connect with the spirit realm, I went out and bought a Ouija board, totally brushing off my father's concerns. By doing that, I gleefully opened a forbidden door. I was blissfully unaware of the massive cosmic tug-of-war I had just initiated between spiritual light and darkness.
Almost instantly, the physical environment in my home shifted. One night, a fire spontaneously broke out right in my bedroom. And it wasn't just the smoke and flames either. This event was heralded by an overwhelming, palpable sense of evil. At the time, I was entirely too blind to see the malevolent presence that was beginning to wrap its ghostly fingers around me.
Which brings us to the first 2 years, the seeds of despair.
Think of these initial 2 years as a dark gestation period. My personal safe spaces were being invaded in this slow, incredibly calculated manipulation of my reality. I'd wake up in cold sweats, feeling the literal, heavy weight of an invisible gaze on me. A seductive, whispering voice started acting as this perverse mentor, filling the quiet corners of my mind and leaving behind a lingering scent of dread that hung in the air like a pestilence.
Looking back at this cruel mentorship, it's terrifyingly clear there was a direct progression from an initial infestation straight down the path to full-blown possession. I was being systematically, psychologically gaslighted. I was lured in by an entity promising me understanding through my suffering, setting this terrifying trap that completely blurred the lines of reality.
And then we hit the middle 5 years, the torture spiral.
This is where the trap slams shut. For the next 5 years, I was plunged into a vortex of pain, and my physical environment escalated to become actively hostile. Living in my house in Egan, the haunting became shockingly visceral. I felt an unsettling presence physically invade my body, literally creeping through my mouth and nose, profoundly violating my personal boundaries. The sheer panic was so intense, I tried to actually shake them off and burn them on my kitchen stove. It sounds crazy, but I could literally feel their flammability.
These demonic spirits infiltrated absolutely everywhere, corrupting how I interacted with the entire world. The mundane became a battlefield. Something as simple as sipping coffee became an unwelcome trigger that hit me like a brutal kick to the stomach, causing massive waves of panic. And sacred spaces? They offered zero sanctuary. The entity infiltrated churches and divine environments, profoundly intensifying my sense of violation. The physical and sensory toll was absolutely gruesome. I endured spectral claws that left actual physical burns on my skin, along with deep psychological scars. I'd wake up with my tongue physically glued to the roof of my mouth, feeling completely bound and silenced, exactly like the biblical figure Ezekiel. I suffered sleep seizures with frothing at the mouth, and these terrifying surges accompanied by agonizing sensations of drowning. Moving into the later years, this was where my faith came under heavy fire. The final 3 years of this decade-long nightmare brought a deep-seated fatigue and the total collapse of my external environment. The trauma compounded in ways that are hard to even fathom. I suffered the unimaginable loss of my son, and this profound grief, paired with relentless demonic attacks, resulted in total chaotic upheaval. I descended into absolute homelessness. It honestly felt like I was trapped on some twisted spiritual reality show gone horribly, horribly wrong.
My core beliefs were systematically battered. The tormentor would sneer at me from the dark, whispering, "Your gods are weak. They offer comfort, not truth." My once steadfast Christian faith really began to buckle under this intense gaslighting. My hollow prayers seemed completely lost in an infernal void. And divine grace? Well, that felt like nothing more than a distant fairy tale.
Which brings us to the breakthrough, the 2016 mission turning point. Right at absolute rock bottom, amidst the total chaos and darkness of 2016, I sent out a desperate SOS signal for help. And at a mission, I finally received an answer. But man, it sparked the most brutal fight of my life. I endured 8 grueling months of focused, relentless battle. It was basically the spiritual equivalent of a full-body workout. I committed to fervent prayer and intense fasting to starve out the flesh, fighting tooth and nail for my liberation.
Of course, the entity did not go quietly. It launched violent retaliations, specifically trying to humiliate me during worship or group discussions. I would literally be sent crashing to the ground, feeling like I was being body-slammed in an invisible wrestling match. The shock, the pain, and the massive public embarrassment left me in tears. It made it look to everyone else as if I alone controlled these personal demons.
Finally, we reach the end of the nightmare, reclaiming my fractured soul. Fueled by honestly, sheer, unadulterated stubbornness, those 12 endless years finally began to loosen their grip. The darkness started to recede, replaced by a highly tangible companion, hope. I realized this agonizing journey had fundamentally transformed me. I went from being a helpless victim, deeply marginalized and lost in the shadows of my own mind, to finding a path to the light. I was finally standing as a sanctified warrior, armed with divine backing. There is a quote that perfectly captures this. "He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, and he set my feet upon a rock." Through the absolute fires of tribulation, I successfully reclaimed my bodily autonomy. I found a strength I had long forgotten, learned how to dance again, and exulted in my hard-won salvation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. When your very own mind becomes a haunted house, what inner strength will you summon to tear down those walls and survive? If the abyss is within us, how fiercely will you fight to find your unyielding light? Thank you so much for letting me share this incredible, harrowing story with you today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.